Scales actually are way more useful than you think, and you should be practicing them, but probably not for the reason your teacher told you. And this kind of starts off the second video in a series I like to call, But Why? Why do I have to practice my major scales? So let's get right into it, and then I'll talk about how you practice scales, and then I'll go through many more reasons than the normal reasons to practice your scales. So first, let's start with the very obvious one that people throw out there. Just because, right? You just got to play your scales. It's just being a pianist, right? This to me is the weakest reason and is really why I am calling this part of the But Why series, because if you've done music any length of time, you have these things that people have told you you must do. They're mandatory, but they don't give you very good reasoning to justify their existence. And so it kind of gives you this confusion where you're like, why am I doing this? Well, let me go to the most obvious actual reason, and that is technical development. So if you are just beginning to play the piano, you're going to need to do a few different things to get really good at piano. The first is you're going to need to learn how to use all 5 of your fingers. And what tends to happen is people have very strong fingers here, but these fingers seem to be very, very weak. Well, here's kind of a funny thing. Scales actually are not the greatest strength builder in 4 and 5. They really are not. Because you end up using 1, 2, 3 far more than the other fingers. You actually only use your pinky once per scale. And so if you do more octaves, you actually even use your pinky less. Well, why is it still good for building strength? It shows us the way that people normally play the piano with the crossovers, that whole trajectory. We'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about strength and technical build-up, though. You are strengthening your fingers when you're playing scales. You're learning the technical way to play the piano. That's really good. I think actually if you're just trying to build your finger strength, there are probably better exercises. One of my favorite is the 3-note. You could do some Hanon. You could do any real pattern. You could do 5-finger scales. This is actually a big one that I like to use personally when I have a very young student, because young students just need to build up the literal strength in their fingertips. So doing 5 fingers is easier to understand and is probably better for just building up that raw strength because you get to evenly work all the fingers. Okay, let's get into the technical reason number 2 that is actually why you need to practice scales, and that is to learn the crossover. I personally hate the term crossover because it implies something that I used to do all the time. People still say to do. This is kind of an ongoing debate, but I find myself firmly in the camp that we should not call it a crossover because we should not indeed be having the thumb or think about having the thumb be reaching over to play the next note, something like this. What are the benefits of this? It plays very smoothly. You know, you can do this with any scale, huge crossover, make sure you're connected. It plays very smoothly, which is wonderful, but the real problem with it is it actually makes our hand shape really get messed up. More on this when we talk about how to practice scales. So I'm just going to put a pin in it and just say we're learning how to cross over. And what do I mean by that? We're learning how to play in more than one place on the piano. You see those guitars back behind me? Guitarists know this very well. They think of placement, right? And then you move. And so you're in different positions. That's what they call it, positions. Same with violin. It's actually even probably more prevalent in those type of instruments. On piano, we don't really talk about positions. We really should, because if we think of the thing as this fluid movement across the piano, it becomes this amorphous thing that really puts our technique at a disadvantage. Instead of thinking, hey, my hand is here, and then my hand is here, then my hand is here, then my hand is here. Again, more on that when we get into the technical reasons of how to play the scales. As we continue to talk about technique, we're going to sort of morph from the technical side into the musicality side. In general, Scales are a fantastic way to learn how to play legato. If you don't know what legato means, legato is the term for smoothness, for connecting notes on the piano. Legato is huge when we play piano. I would argue legato is the number one most important articulation skill that you have to know to play the piano well. Why do I say that? Well, legato is really what turns something into a very beautiful performance as opposed to something that is less, less conveying, less emotional, right? If you go da da dee 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 dee, staccato can definitely have its place, and separating notes can have its place, but it doesn't read to our ears as romantic, as beautiful as. And I think the reason why is because we're thinking of the voice, so legato really pushes that. How do scales teach us legato? Well, they're just a set of notes that we have to play in order in a row, so we can learn that technique of holding down one note past when you play the next one, then letting it go. That is really important. I guess we should also clarify. We're talking finger legato, not using the pedal, just using the fingers to make that legato. Okay, what other musical techniques can we learn from scales? We can learn while we're practicing scales dynamics, crescendos, decrescendos, staccato, swing, literally any musical concept you can imagine, we can learn using scales. They don't directly teach them, but if you have a teacher worth their salt, they will sprinkle them in and allow you to learn these things while you're playing scales. You're probably still not convinced you need to practice your scales, so let me continue talking about the whys. Here is my absolute all-time favorite why as to why you should practice scales, and that is improv and composition. Here's the thing. If you ever have wanted to make up beautiful music, all you need to know is scales, and then you need to know how chords and scales interact in our friends and buddies. So let's imagine that we know the A flat major scale. Well, right away I can just play A flat in my left hand, and then any note in that scale is going to sound beautiful. Isn't that amazing? And then with a little bit more knowledge in how to apply chords with that, I can turn into a whole song. That is just scale knowledge. That is what I'm talking about. Who told you that? Who talks about that? Almost no one when they teach piano, and it drives me crazy. If we want to really inspire students, we should be putting this at the front of the lesson, not as like when they become a teenager going like, oh, by the way, even though you've been spending like 10 years of me yelling at you to play scales, they actually are really useful for things other than just, warming up at the beginning of a lesson. I guess I should have put that at the beginning. Warming up is another very common reason people use about scales, but guess what? You can just warm up playing your piece. You don't have to warm up using scales. Anyway, scales, amazing for improv and composition. One of my favorite reasons to know scales. Also, scales help prepare us for the pieces we're going to play. If you are playing, whatever that piece is, I can't remember exactly how it goes, Bach Invention in F major, play an F major scale, you will be ready for it. Amazing. All right, another one. This one is another super, super important one that people do not talk about, and that is pop music. Pop music is almost always based around a major scale. If you know your major scale, guess what? You just took 12 possible notes that you have to worry about when you're learning a song, and you reduce them down to 7. And if you know your pentatonic scale, then you take those 7 notes and you reduce the probability down to only 5 notes with the possibility of those other 2. It is so powerful. If you've ever wondered how people can learn music so quickly by ear, it is based on this. You've got, for example, Don't Stop Believing. It is an E major. If I know it starts on E, I know it's not going to be F, G, because there is no F and G in E major. There is F sharp and G sharp, though. So we get this. Oh, wonderful. How about the next note? It goes up, but I know it's not C. How do I know it's not C? Because we have C sharp and D sharp in E major. Why do I know this? Because I have practiced my scales. This is the bee's knees. So to summarize up, the why is multifaceted, and it really comes down to the scales are this core language that allows you to basically address so many specific things that you are going to get so far ahead of the learning curve with classical, with jazz, with pop, with improvisation, with your own compositions, that it's just going to justify everything for you. It's going to really give you a head start. That is really kind of sunsetting the why. Although I will throw in one more, which is communication. If you know scales, it's so much easier to communicate to other musicians when you're playing with them. But let's move into the how. How should you practice scales? I want to give you 2 particular options. There are tons of ways to practice scales, but these would be my 2 favorites, and you can mix and match. You can decide what you want to do, however you want to do it. Here is option number 1. You're going to start either with a metronome or not. You don't have to have a metronome, but you're going to start with either a metronome or not. I'll throw on a metronome. Why not? We'll put it at like 90. And we're going to do just quarter notes. Ooh, that's a nice beat. Let's turn off the beat. That was fun, though. All right, we're going to just have the metronome going. Okay, I'm going to play quarter notes. Oh, apparently I still have music. Okay, there we go. Now we shouldn't have anything. Here we go. 4, 1. Quarter notes. Just 1 octave. We'll go down an octave. 8th notes. For 2 octaves. And then 16ths. And while you're doing that, what you want to really focus on is that finger activation and staying very close to the keys, staying very relaxed. This is your time. I think the note that I heard a lot from teachers that I really liked is breathe. Breathe, 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 breathe. If you are not breathing while you're playing scales, it is a telltale sign that you are not relaxed. It's not going to go very well for you. Okay. That is a fantastic way to play through the scales. It's going to give you everything you need. Now, let's say you're having troubles with playing quickly. Well, what you can always do is you actually can set the metronome much faster. So I was at 90. We're going to go to 180, and we're going to put that actually as the basically as it's going to be doubled up, right? So this is now the 8th notes. And then the 8th notes are the 16ths. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but it actually makes it easier to be able to do it if you double up the metronome like that. So you got to know a little bit of math, 90 times 2, 180, whatever, piece of cake. That's an easy way to do it. Then you can slow it back down. Maybe you actually start at like 140, you get up to 180, then you go back to 70 and you do that, and then you speed it up to 80, 90, whatever the goal is. I think 100 is a pretty reasonable goal for all scales at 16th notes. Pretty reasonable goal to get to. All right. How about method number 2? This one is the chunks, the frozen chunks. And this is more to get those fingerings down, but it's super helpful. Let's go to a very tricky scale, B flat major. We're going to just do the left hand. We're going to go 3, 2, 1. Then 4, 3, 2, 1. Then 3, 2, 1. Then 4, 3, 2, 1. Then 3. Just like that. The right hand is going to be 4. Then 1, 2, 3. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1, 2, 3. Exactly like that. And then you play it together. What benefit does this have, this frozen chunk method? You can even do it like this if you want, with both hands. It's just kind of a little weird. So it's almost better to do it hand separately. The benefit is we want our brain to be thinking in this positional framework like I mentioned earlier, kind of like guitarists use. It's going to really help us to develop a lot of ideas and familiarity with the scales. Now, I could go in and probably give you, no joke, 10 to 15 different ways to practice scales because there are so many different ways to practice scales and they're all super useful. But I will just say this. If you cannot hear every single note you're playing, if you are not in control of every single note you're playing, if your hands are not perfectly lined up, then this is your sign, this is your opportunity to slow that down and work on your scales. If you do not practice your scales and you consider yourself a musician, and this is something that's important to you, I say stop whatever you are doing, commit hard again to practice scales. I, as a professional musician, if I do not have enough time in the day to actually practice and practice pieces and what I enjoy and play songs, guess what? The only thing I play then that day is scales. I know everybody does the opposite. Seriously, I know so many people, they just go straight into the songs. You are shortchanging yourself. The better you are at scales, the better you're going to be at literally everything else. I'm Robert Monroe. Hope you enjoyed this video. Comment, like, subscribe. It really, really does help. And thanks so much. Peace out.